What do I tell the Japanese trade delegation?
I delegate that decision to you.
You want me to inform the VP?
No.
We should at least include the Minister of Sport.
No.
I strongly advise against doing this, especially on your own. It gives the impression of autocratic leadership. You risk alienating your cabinet and your party.
Your advice is duly noted.
Madiba, the people want this. They hate the Springboks. They don't want to be represented by a team they cheered against all their lives.
Yes, I know, but in this instance, the people are wrong. And as their elected leader, it is my job to show them that.
You're risking your political capital. You're risking your future as our leader.
The day I am afraid to do that is the day I am no longer fit to lead.
That was Morgan Freeman as Nelson Mandela in that splendid film, Invictus. In this election year, we've been focusing on various aspects of the presidency from the perspective of our political institutions. But most of you watching tonight aren't in government, you're in private life. And so tonight I thought I'd pose a question from a non-governmental perspective. What are you looking for in a president? A leader, or a manager, or both? I'm Manolo Quezon, the Explainer. Tonight's episode takes a cue from a column I wrote recently titled Leaders and Managers. As our country divides on the question of whom to elect, it seems to me that perceived pros and cons for the candidates reflects our individual biases for or against leaders or managers. Now, the leading candidate has put himself forward as a servant leader, someone who can be trusted to make the right choices and lead by example. His main rival has put himself forward as a hard-working manager who has the practical experience required to keep things smoothly in hand. Other candidates also put themselves forward as loyal, trustworthy managers who have the skills required to continue the policies of the present administration, while others put themselves forward as visionary leaders who can break apart institutions if required to remold and re-energize them. As it is, most of the major candidates for the presidency are legislators, and this brings with it its own set of problems. Manuel Quezon admitted in his autobiography, The Good Fight, that if you look at the chapter on executive problems, Quezon confessed that becoming a chief executive requires adjustments from someone used to legislative work. The transition depends on finding a team the former legislator can work with as he settles in the job of chief executive. But these realities are often ignored by we the people, because public opinion, as this Free Press editorial cartoon pointed out in the 1960s, is more often than not focused on what we're against than what we're actually for. We know what we don't like, but rarely express what we want. Now, public opinion tells us that, like this picture, most of the public finds the image of our officials at present to be askew. Fairly or not, our perceptions of the incumbent will influence our choices for her successor. In 1935, Quezon, in the center of this photo, was elected in part because he fostered the image of taking a firm hand in public administration and being a good judge of character. Vice President Osmeña, in profile to your left, was viewed as a cooperative conciliator. A yin and yang team, in other words, was what was put forward. In 1946, the same dynamics were manifested in Rojas at the foot of the table facing you and Quirino at the head of the table. Quezon and Rojas indicated that the public viewed leadership as the foremost quality a president needed, but they were also known for freely delegating authority to their subordinates and so knew how to manage people. Osmeña and Quirino, however, were more detail-oriented and managerial in orientation. Now, President Magsaysay was a fiery and demanding leader and quite impatient with managerial details. He was closer to Quezon in his restlessness and impatience with office work. Now, in contrast, President Garcia, according to Carlos P. Romulo, was a manager's manager. If he were alive today, he'd glory in Gantt charts. He would call Romulo in Washington and systematically go through a prepared or pre-prepared agenda point by point, in contrast to Magsaysay's folksy, informal, and often rambling style. Now, Macapagal was another manager's manager, working long hours and frightening his doctors because of his punishing work schedule. But he was less accomplished in delegating authority or getting people on the same page, the leadership aspect of his job. President Marcos was for many of us alive today the personification of the combined leader-manager, though his chief limitation was he did not foster a succession. Subordinates were never permitted or encouraged to rise too high because as dictator, no potential successor could arise from outside the Marcos family. President Aquino became a study in contrasts as she approached her job from the perspective of a transformative leader. The managerial side of her job was less developed and eventually the public would seek a successor more of a manager than she was. Fidel V. Ramos was an accomplished manager as military top brass tend to be, but consciously tried to complement that aspect of his job with signs of leadership. Now, Joseph Estrada was elected in a revolt against the technocrats, and his informal style led in turn to a revolt that replaced him with an administration that pursued a punishing schedule and obsessed over detail, more manager than leader. And this explains why the low charisma management of the past 9 years has divided voters over whether they want leaders capable of inspiring trust or want more of the same detail-oriented management style we've been seeing all along. But let's get down to the nitty-gritty and define our terms to see why we're divided and how we might reconcile the two. This man, Gary Wills, has written often and brilliantly on leadership, and let me read you his definition of the word. In his book, Certain Trumpets, The Call of Leaders, he says a leader is someone who can move people to act on and pursue the goals leaders and followers share. Now, he holds up as a model the American President Franklin D. Roosevelt, a man of charisma, eloquence, and political smarts. Now, Wills wrote that what made Roosevelt a leader was that he lent his charisma to subordinates and created institutions that outlived him. He inspired changes that had a lasting impact and benefit for the public, like Social Security. In contrast, Wills held up John F. Kennedy as a negative example of a leader because he viewed the bureaucracy and government as an opponent, a target for macho aggression. The result was that instead of fostering institutions, Kennedy kept trying to tear them down to prove he could win. For managers, we move on to an ancient text that is widely studied not just by soldiers but by people in business, The Art of War by the sage and general Sun Tzu. In war, we hear of great generals making eloquent speeches, a hallmark of the effective leader. But Sun Tzu wrote that this wasn't enough. You had to institutionalize orders and communications, what he called the network of gongs and drums, and see beyond the horizon by means of flag signals. The job of the manager, then, is to use these instruments of communication and control so everyone in the organization forms a single body, where it is impossible for the brave to advance alone or the cowardly to act alone. In other words, management is the art of handling large masses of men. So you've seen leadership is inspirational, the handling of trust issues, while managers are interested in the smooth functioning of systems. A gigantic amount of literature has been written on these challenges. Now let me pick from the Practice of Leadership blog to point out the crucial difference between those who advocate leadership and those who prefer management. Citing a classic article from the Harvard Business Review in 1977, the blog quotes Abraham Zalesnik as saying managers and leaders differ in the conception they hold concerning chaos and order deep in their own psyche. Managers hate chaos. Leaders tolerate it. Managers prefer order to the extent that they will try to impose it, while leaders will postpone artificially imposed order and let things be chaotic for a while if it will help a situation unfold and the problem reveal itself more fully. Leaders, according to Zalesnik, have more in common with artists and creative thinkers than they do with managers. Now, the ChangingMinds.org blog has a great chart that boils down the differences between leaders and managers. At the heart of it, if you look at it, are the blue words in the center of the chart. That is, that leaders and managers differ in terms of style. Leaders are transformational. They inspire people to do things differently. Managers, on the other hand, are transactional, fostering deals to get things done. Leaders will sell. Managers tell. Leaders exchange excitement for people to work, while managers exchange money for people to work. The Wall Street Journal's Management Online page also looks at the literature to explore these contrasts, as put forward by Alan Murray. It's an interesting study in contrasts. The manager focuses on systems